Today on the Pro-Life Podcast, we just had lawmakers' first chance in Texas after Roe v. Wade to pass some pro-life laws. What did they do? Director Rebecca Parma's here to tell us what happened. Did we win? Did we lose? What are we doing next? We need to talk about this. Let's get started. Happy Thursday, Pro-Life family. Welcome to the table. Grab your coffee. That's how we get through the day when we're adults. And good conversations with friends. Ladies, thank you for being here.
Always.
Would you mind introducing yourself? For the friends who are listening,
Yes.
so they can kind of put a name with a voice.
Kim Schwartz, Director of Media and Communication.
And I'm Rebecca Parma. I'm the Legislative Director.
Wow.
Klingerman, IT Director. Rebecca, thank you for being here. We talk about you.
Yeah.
But this, I think, is the first time we got you in the hot seat.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So,
Good times. And
So-
we're both wearing our polka dots. We
Yes.
got the memo. Brent, you didn't get the memo?
no.
Oh.
I must be behind in my emails. I honestly don't think I mean, maybe a tie.
You don't own
think I
anything polka dot?
anything. Maybe an old pair of socks.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.
There
yeah,
you go.
That's fair.
Which, if I had them on, you wouldn't know.
True. All right. Well, we'll keep going. We'll just say
So-
Brent is wearing polka dot socks. Why not?
Sure. Why not?
Yeah.
This is okay. Let's stay on topic. Okay. So session has just ended. And for those of you who it's been a while since government, 5 months every other year. This is what we have to get laws changed, passed, undone, whatever.
Right.
Pass a budget and all the business of the state. Yeah, those elected officials. 5 months. Okay. So we went into this with a stout list of to-dos
Yes.
for our elected officials in 5 months.
Yeah.
But this is the first session in a post-Roe world, right? The
Right.
lid is off the box. The sky's the limit. We can theoretically, all those things they always went, well, but Roe exists, so now
Right.
there's rules are gone,
Right.
right?
And this is our first session post-Roe. And so there's no excuses for the Supreme Court limiting what we could do. And it was a really unique opportunity, and we know this in Texas, but to show that we're not just pro-birth, we're pro-life. And what does that mean? And our
Yes.
agenda really reflected that, of continuing to care for mothers and preborn children, but also expanding like what we can touch and accomplish this session. That was
Yeah.
the goal of our agenda.
In this agenda, we'll just go through the list and let's talk about what went well, what didn't go so
Yeah.
well, just the good, the bad, the ugly, all right? This is a long list. So reforming the 10-day rule of the Advanced Directives Act.
Yeah.
This has been on the to-do list for like,
Since 1999. Since
Yeah.
the law passed, and we were like, oh, wait, like this has some serious problems. And then,
so 24 years.
yeah,
Right.
jeopardizing Texas patients like nonstop.
Yeah. And we've got slews of videos in the YouTube about what a terrible thing this is and the complicated mess that it is. So
Yeah.
how'd we do?
So this was a huge accomplishment this session was on reforming the 10-day rule. Yeah, and it was unique because this session, all of the stakeholders got around a table before session started, thanks to Chairwoman Stephanie Click. She's
Okay,
a representative from the Fort Worth area. She's cared about this issue for 20 years since the law took effect, even before she was a legislator. She was
Cool.
informing other legislators
That's
about
how
it.
you
And
know it's legit.
yeah. And so it's been cool to see her just continue to care about this issue. And so she got all the stakeholders around the table, those who oppose the 10-day rule, those who are for it, and hammered out 40 plus hours of negotiations, talking through this bill, a compromise bill. And so it's an incremental improvement. There's still work to be done, but so many great reforms that will help us in our work of serving vulnerable patients and protecting vulnerable patients, restoring some of their rights.
Okay.
And so this was a great victory. I'm super thankful for that.
Cool. So what kind of adjustments have we seen? This isn't like a full undoing,
Right.
but it steps in the right direction.
Right. And so something we talk about a lot is repeal and replace the 10-day rule. And so we were not able to achieve that this session, but the other things we were able to achieve help us in restoring those patient protections, in reforming the law. And so some of them are no longer allowing this process to be used on competent patients. And that's something that we have seen in the patients that we serve.
Thank the Lord.
Right. And
This
so
seems to make sense.
It happens
Right.
way more often than I think people think. Like, I remember whenever I would tell people, like, this is the 10-day rule. It allows hospital committees to take away life-sustaining treatment against someone's will, or like if you have a medical power of attorney, against their will. But this is used on competent patients way more often than people realize. Whenever I would say, this patient that we're helping right now is conscious and is saying, like, yes, I do want treatment.
Right.
They were like, that's not legal. They can't do that. And I'm like, I'm telling you, it's legal and it's happening. And it's just like, it's so shocking that people didn't believe it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's something even in the stakeholder meetings that it was a fairly agreed to piece, right? There were some pieces that were not, there were some pieces that were harder and some pieces that were easier. And so another piece is preventing hospitals from using quality of life judgments to withdraw treatment, which is huge. And then kind of one of the most impactful is requiring procedures that would help facilitate a transfer to another facility or another physician, requiring those procedures to be performed before the countdown can begin.
Hey.
And so that, even though we didn't repeal the 10-day rule, that adds this protection and this time frame to allow patients to get that treatment or that procedure they need to transfer home or transfer to a lower level of healthcare. And that way you're honoring the patient's medical decision, but also allowing the hospital to no longer have to provide that treatment by performing that procedure.
That one quite a bit, where it's like, well, we're starting this process and you can't get this patient transferred to another facility because there's procedures that have to happen. And the current hospital is saying, well, we've started this 10-day thing, so we don't have to do that.
Right.
At that point, they kind of have a hostage situation.
It really is.
Right. This helps realign the incentives, right? And realign a little bit the balance of power. And so if you know you can't start the countdown until you perform a procedure, the incentives have shifted. And that's helpful.
Cool.
Game changer.
Yeah.
Any other major changes on this front?
No, we had a couple different bills in this like defending pro-life values in healthcare bucket. The other bills, they were dead on arrival. Unfortunately, we'll keep working on those pieces, but I mean, this is a huge victory on reforming the TADA process and the 10-day rule.
Yeah. And I do want to like emphasize, it's still important to have our patient advocacy ministry because there are still going to be patients who call our office who need help. And what I want to ask, what still will need to be done in the future? Because I don't want people to think like, oh, well, we passed this bill, we're done. And it's true that this is a big improvement, and this is the biggest improvement that we've had since the law passed. Right. But what would still need to be done in order to fully protect Texas patients?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One is in this new bill, there's reporting, and that's great. And so we'll kind of see based on that what's going on. That'll help us frame the policy moving forward. But really, two things still need to be done for sure. One is we like the 10-day countdown, even though that has been extended, that time frame, it needs to be repealed. That's just good policy. It balances the power. It realigns the incentives. We see this in other states, other highly populated states, where it has not broken their healthcare system, it hasn't bankrupted the hospitals. And so that piece needs to still be fully accomplished. But the other piece is to prohibit discrimination from occurring in these situations, specifically for individuals with disabilities. We see that a lot. And we prohibit discrimination based on disability in a lot of areas. And this is another area where it certainly needs to be prohibited.
And another issue that we keep running into is brain death and kind of the definition and how that works. And every policy in a hospital is a different one from one place to another place. And anything on that front?
No, this process and this bill doesn't touch brain death. That's a whole other conversation and part of law that we'll have to.
Okay, so we're still.
If you thought there were some tough negotiations here, you just wait until we get to brain death.
And we still get a lot of those calls.
Right.
So the phone calls aren't going away. There'll be less in one bucket and more in another. Probably.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. But big progress on 10-day rule.
Yeah.
Okay. Item 2 was increasing funding for the Alternatives to Abortion program. This is resources for new moms, so they can go to a pregnancy center and get the basic needs classes and support through that first year or so.
Right. So the Alternatives to Abortion program, is a statewide network of maternity homes, adoption agencies, pregnancy resource centers, and they serve pregnant women throughout the pregnancy and up to 3 years after the birth of their child. And they provide social services, so not medical, only social things like diapers and formula and parenting classes and resume building and all these kind of very like social service, tangible life skills, right? And so we have the most well-funded, most robust program in the country. And so this was really important heading into this session because even though Roe has been overturned, we've already seen post-Roe, so it's like almost a year, right, to Roe being overturned. We've seen in that program a 43% increase in demand for services. So this program and its need is not going anywhere. Like if anything, it's increasing because women are coming in earlier in their pregnancy and they're coming back more frequently.
Good. Praise God.
43%.
43%.
Praise
and so
God.
Heading
That's
into
incredible.
session, we could project that there was going to be a shortfall in the funding for the current biennium because of that increase. And so we are pushing for a supplemental funding and then funding for the next 2 years. Our Texas budget goes for a 2-year period because we only meet every other year. So for the next 2 years of $200 million. And so ultimately, we didn't get there. What happened was the Senate had a budget of about $140 million. We pushed in the House to get that supplemental funding. We got that at $25 million for the rest of this year, and then $200 million for the next 2 years.
Epic.
Well, then the conference committee met. This is like a smaller group of legislators from the House and the Senate meeting, and the report came out, and the number is back at $140 million.
Boo.
And so we had supporters like y'all contact your elected officials, and we weren't able to get back to that $200 million. Ultimately, total for the next 2 years, we have $165 million, which is still an increase from last session, but it's not going to be enough to meet the need. Right. So it's still underfunded. And I think the problem is that even though we have banned elective abortion in our state from the moment of fertilization, right, we still have women who are considering abortion. That's either they're going to get the pills illegally, they're going to go to another state. And we want to make sure that women in Texas thrive and choose life. And this is one of the programs and really tangible ways we do that. And so by underfunding the program, we're kind of undercutting that continued need. And so we're going to keep, obviously, we care about this program. We've been advocating for it for nearly two decades. And so we're going to keep monitoring it and keep pushing for protection for it. But it was underfunded this session.
Did lawmakers see that threat whenever you said, like, hey, women are still considering abortion, even though, we see this very successful program and we see more women in the program, but there's still that temptation to have an illegal abortion or an out-of-state abortion. Did lawmakers see that challenge? And did they did they see that challenge?
No. I think that was a huge problem in this, was that they viewed that, well, elective abortion is prohibited. So we're in this post-Dobbs world, yay, which is true. But that doesn't change that abortion is still something that women are considering. And so that was a huge problem in making sure the program was fully funded, is just not acknowledging the reality of the boots on the ground, which is what these pregnancy centers and adoption agencies and maternity homes see, is that women are still considering abortion. And so just because it's not legal doesn't mean they're not considering it. And so that was a hard educational piece that we're just going to have to keep working on, and making sure that our legislators know that, like, abortion is still a reality in Texas, even though it's illegal. So
doing the math, that kind of growth, this doesn't add up. We're a little short here. 200 million would have been the ideal, and we ended up 165. Close, but not quite. So the legislature kind of let us down on this one.
Right.
Okay. There's still like 4 more things on this list I want to cover, but we need to take a quick break. So we will come back to how we did on private enforcement and reform on adoption and mother's medical. There's a lot. Okay, we'll talk about these things when we come back. Texas Right to Life is facing 14 lawsuits from Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry. They're suing us because we helped pass the Texas Heartbeat Act, and they're trying to scare us pro-lifers into backing them. Please join us in the fight against Planned Parenthood and donate to protect the Texas Heartbeat Act. You can fight for the unborn and build a pro-life Texas that values every human life. Go to texasrighttolife.com/lawsuit to make your contribution. Every cent will help, and it's greatly appreciated.
Without warning, you or your loved one could end up in the emergency room where every second counts and your medical wishes matter more than ever. However, if your loved one doesn't have the right medical documents on hand, they may not be able to make decisions for you in a crisis. My Life Angels solves all of this by walking you through step by step in creating these important medical documents and storing them online securely for you and your family to access at any time. The service is only $7 a month, but use the link in our description for 20% off your initial subscription period. Don't let strangers make life and death decisions for you. Get the My Life Angels app today.
Welcome back, friends. We're still here with our friend Rebecca Parma. Thank you for being in town, taking a break from the craziness in Austin.
Yeah.
So we are also discussing on the alternatives to abortion. It got a little squirrelier. We're not calling it that anymore.
Right. So there is another bill on this issue, Senate Bill 24, and it's renaming the program, which is fine. I think that's fair to acknowledge that.
As long as it's doing the same
right.
thing.
I don't really care what it's named as long as it accomplishes the goal. So the new name is going to be Thriving Texas Families.
Okay.
And
we want those.
Right. And the goal of this bill, it was a well-intentioned bill, was to kind of create this spectrum of care for Texas families, starting with pregnant women, preborn children throughout. And so our concern with this bill, and we voiced this throughout the legislative process, was it's going to have a negative effect on the program. Whatever that program is called, right? It's going to have a negative effect.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, some of the changes we asked for were not adopted. And so that bill is going to be signed by the governor and go into effect.
Mm.
But our concern with it is that it dilutes the program because it's allowing non-pro-life focused organizations to apply for the funding. And so all of that funding, that $165 million we talked about,
that we just did the math, that barely covers with a little population growth.
Right.
It's just barely going to maintain status quo.
Right. For those pregnancy centers, adoption agencies, maternity homes, if we're allowing non-pro-life focused organizations also to receive that funding, obviously that dilutes how much all these other groups are going to get.
Yeah.
And so our concern is that pregnant women, mothers up to 3 years after the birth of their child, those families are not going to receive the life-affirming social services that they need to help them choose life and thrive. Mm-hmm. Our other concern with the bill was just some requirements on contracting, and a lot of these pregnancy centers, maternity homes, adoption agencies, like they have to report. They don't just get this money without reporting. Like they have to report something. Right, and they have to show who they're serving, what that looks like, the services, all of that. So that's not an issue, but some of the reporting requirements were vague. Performance outcomes and were required before you could continue receiving your contract. That's the way we read the bill. And so that's concerning if we have pregnancy centers who could certainly meet these outcomes, but just haven't been reporting them or haven't been compiling that data. And so we're just going to keep an eye on implementation of this bill. It was well-intentioned and we want this program to continue thriving. We want Texas families to thrive. And so we'll keep an eye on the agency tasked with overseeing the program and use our legislators who care about this program and who are behind this bill to make sure that goal is still achieved.
Yeah.
And the agency supervising this is
the Texas Health and Human Services Commission.
Right.
And so they're in the history of this program, they have been one of the biggest threats to the program. And so
theoretically they can just water it down.
Well, okay, so like you have the state agency, right? So the legislature passes the bill saying, all right, we've got this budget, we've got this program, let's put these dollars in this program.
Right.
All right. Now the executive branch, going back to government, they're the ones in charge of actually like doing the thing that the legislature said. How does the agency like do the thing? Like what do they do?
Right. So they are tasked with the contracting part. They're tasked with getting that data, that reporting, and compiling that report and giving it to the legislature. So this is a fee-for-service program, so they don't get the money and then do the service. Like they have to provide the service and then they get reimbursed.
The pregnancy centers,
right? The providers, and so they take care of that reimbursement process. And so there's just some different ways that if you wanted to water down this program, or if you didn't care about the pro-life goal of the program, you could already have done that anyway, and then this bill gives them more jurisdiction and more leeway.
Yeah.
And so we already have to watch this agency anyway in implementation of the Alternatives to Abortion program, and so we're just going to have to keep doing that, and that's
say
okay.
They contract more social things.
Like homelessness orgs, what other,
the list of social programs you could be funding.
Right.
and now all of these groups have done services out of pocket, and now we're waiting to be reimbursed.
Right.
Oh, but we ran out of money.
Right. And so, like the pregnancy centers in Texas, they're not going to stop serving women.
No,
but they're not going to get reimbursed from the state anymore. And that's already what we've seen with that 43% increase is like the pregnancy centers they're about to run out of money. They're not going to stop doing the services,
right.
but they're not going to be reimbursed. And obviously that's going to affect how many services you can provide. Like that's just basic math. So
I mean, that's how you pay for the people who do that work.
Right.
Oof. Okay. So the legislature dropped the ball.
Yeah.
R.I.P.
Yeah.
What other tasks did we have to do to build a pro-life Texas that did or did not happen?
Yeah, so we had a couple other kind of mixed bag on Build a Pro-Life Texas. And so one that definitely want to talk about is the adoption bill. If you follow us at all, you probably contacted your legislator and asked them about this bill.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. So this bill would have lowered the cost of adoption.
Nice.
And cost is a huge barrier to adoption, right? Especially private adoptions. And so this bill would have created kind of a graded system of matching funds to help families, middle and lower income families, match the cost of adoption so that these children are placed with loving families.
Now, if I remember it, this bill kind of like came up late.
Right.
But thanks to our supporters, like bullet trained its way through committee and things.
Yeah. Right. So it had a late hearing, which usually if you have a late hearing, you're done. But anyhow, it had a late hearing. Y'all reached out. It got through its House committee. It made it through the House Calendars Committee. It got placed on the House calendar, but it got placed on the calendar the last week that they could be heard, that bills could be heard. And so it died. And so, huge bummer, but also amazing how it was able to move this far.
Oh, yeah.
The problem was this is the only bill to address adoption costs that was actually filed.
Yeah.
And so certainly something we're going to keep working on. This is a huge piece where as the pro-life movement, we already care about this and we can just lean in even further.
Yeah.
So that was a bummer. But some other good things that happened in this Build a Pro-Life Texas piece are providing reforms for pregnant and parenting college students. And so this is the demographic most targeted for abortion and our college campuses. And so these reforms would give parenting students priority registration for their classes, which is a nice reform. They're under a lot of pressure, a lot of time constraints. This would help them make their class schedule and be able to parent well and school well, all that.
Yeah.
And then the other one is to codify federal protections for pregnant and parenting college students to protect them from discrimination. And so just allowing that state level enforcement so that our colleges are helping this demographic thrive and not drop out of school and not be able to come back and actually parent well and thrive in school and thrive professionally.
Yeah, exactly.
So those are good victories as well.
Nice.
Okay, so we almost got there with one, and we did really well on college students.
Yeah.
So again, we win some, lose some.
Right.
Okay. So far we're kind of batting 50.
Yeah.
Oh. Well.
Hey.
Okay.
We'll talk more in a little bit. There are some other opportunities, especially with the adoption bill, to keep that ball moving. But we're gonna come back to that here in a second.
Teaser.
Let's talk about the third thing.
Okay. So the other thing on here was expanding the private enforcement mechanism in the Heartbeat Act to apply to all abortions.
Right. So this kind of bucket we were framing as fully enforce our pro-life laws.
Okay, I was about to ask you to put that in English.
And hold the abortion industry accountable. Right. Yeah, that was legal jargon.
Right. But the short is there's a lot of district attorneys who are like,
right. So even before Roe was overturned, we had district attorneys across the country sign a letter saying, even if Roe is overturned, we're not enforcing your pro-life laws. And 5 of those are in Texas, and they are in our major Texas cities. And so even after then, Roe was overturned and Dobbs came down, they've reaffirmed that through different policies, different statements. And so we really wanted to hold them accountable, but also have a way to go around them. Because in certain cities, right, even if you get rid of a bad DA, you're probably going to get another bad DA. And so we have to have a way to go around them. This is what the Texas Heartbeat Act did, why it was so effective and so revolutionary. And so in this bucket, the legislature really ignored these new deadly threats and neglected preborn children in this way. Again, because we've banned elective abortion in our state. There's nothing more to do, right?
That's what they think.
Wrong, right. And that's because we're seeing these innovative, deadly trends from the abortion industry where they're mailing illegal drugs into our state. They are shipping them across the border. We have these boats off the Gulf Coast that are performing abortions in federal waters. And so they're pivoting in this post-Roe world, and we can't let that become the status quo. And that was the goal of this bucket. And so, like Kim kind of hinted at, there's more opportunities for this too. But ultimately, those new deadly threats were really ignored by our lawmakers. And so there's a lot of work still to do in this area.
Yeah, it's been stunning to see how creative the abortion industry has gotten after the reversal of Roe v. Wade with doing abortions in the Gulf of Mexico on a boat. Like, who would have thought that would be where we are?
Right.
And then, of course, the Biden administration is not helping us in this regard, especially with mailing the abortion pills into places where they know it's illegal. And with any other substance, they would say, hey, don't do that. And they would, regulate the post office and be like, hey, don't do that. But the Biden administration is just like, don't even worry about it. All right. Who needs laws? So you have that here in Texas and the opportunity to have done something. And lawmakers were just like, no, women aren't considering abortion. So just don't even worry about it. And it's like, that's not reality. And we need to keep being vocal about that issue, because if we don't say something, then the abortion industry is not going to stop. They're still going to make even more creative threats to preborn children.
Right.
And if lawmakers don't stop that now, that becomes the status quo.
Right. So that was disappointing. But something I do want to say on kind of this bucket, it was going into session, we were really worried about weakening exceptions being added to our bills for sexual assault, for incest, for fetal abnormality. And thankfully, there were no bills filed to do that by Republicans, which was kind of our concern. There were several of those bills filed by Democrats, but ultimately, none of those weakening exceptions were adopted. None of them became law. And so that is something worth celebrating as well, is that all of our strong pro-life laws are still strong at the end of this session. And that's great. That's something we're always going to have to monitor. We just need to keep pushing for making sure those strong laws are fully enforced. And that's something we're just going to have to keep working on.
I mean, they will listen. The adoption bill proves if we scream loud enough, they'll do something.
And alternatives to abortion too. Remember, like that really was the Lord, first of all. And second of all, everyone who contacted their state representatives and senators at that time, because we were in the final days of session. Didn't have a lot of time to fix the amount that they put for $140 million for alternatives to abortion. So we were trying to do anything possible to get that funding increased. And because people like you spoke up, then they gave us the extra flexibility on the $25 million. So it's at $165 million. If people had not contacted their lawmakers, we'd still be at 140.
Right. Absolutely.
So you do make a difference. It's incredible.
So for our pro-life session, what's our next steps? There's some big items here we didn't get across the finish line.
Right.
What can we do now?
Right. So the regular session is done, but the governor has the ability to call special sessions, and these are 30 days long maximum. And the legislature can only address the items that he specifically puts on the call. And so we're actually in the middle, as of this filming, we're in the middle of a special session right now. There's no pro-life items on that call. It's a couple different items. And so we expect, though, that there will be multiple special sessions because several priority items for the governor were not passed. And so we are going to push that some of these items that didn't get addressed, some of the pro-life priorities, are added to a special session call, specifically the adoption bill, and then also this enforcement piece of making sure our pro-life laws are fully enforced. And so you can be on the lookout for that call to action, and we're going to contact the governor and ask him to consider putting these pro-life items on a call so that the legislature has another chance to make sure preborn children are protected and show that we are a truly pro-life state and not just anti-abortion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So for your team, we get into another special session.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this thing on the agenda from the governor. What's that mean for you guys?
Yeah. So essentially it's the 140-day session in 30 days.
So
it's a lot. And I mean, if the governor puts that on, that's great. We'll be in the Capitol every day pushing for it. So until that time, we're going to keep monitoring, and we'll be in the Capitol talking to our lawmakers. But if the items are added, it's like a little mini session where it's all crammed in 30 days and trying to accomplish as much as we can in that time frame.
So this is a mini session that's going to run through June.
Right.
And he may adjust that at any point in June. So you might get like 2 weeks and make this thing happen.
Right. Lots of unknowns.
Yeah.
Pray for them.
Yeah.
Yes.
My
please
goodness.
do.
Well, and if you viewing at home, send enough emails to the governor's office about putting this on the session, we can get it, maybe 3 weeks notice, but we can get it on there and get this moving.
Yeah.
Okay. For those viewing at home, what you can do about this, of course, we'll put out the call to contact the governor's office, right, to get this added to the session.
There's a guy you can email. We'll put his email address in the description here.
But also, this is one of those things for our team that is an expense that, because it's a surprise from the governor, this is extra. So we're going to put a link below that you can give towards this legislative effort so we can keep the ball rolling once the governor gets this on the list, because you're going to send him a bunch of emails and get him to get it on the list. Once it gets on the list, then we have the funding to move forward with Rebecca's team here, because the ladies in that department, they work very hard for this, and they've got very little time to do it once it goes on the list.
Yeah.
So
that plus the monitoring the alternatives to abortion funding too, like that's a guaranteed that we have this funding with the threat of it being diluted among a bunch of other people who are not pregnancy centers, who are not adoption agencies. So if you want funding to go to pregnancy centers and adoption agencies, and keep an eye on the state agency that usually works against them, these are the people who do it.
It's true. It's true. It sounds like, well, the legislature should go for 5 months, and then what do you guys do for the rest?
Right.
Well, you're keeping up with all these politicians and writing new laws and helping other states and monitoring what the government's doing with the money that they've allotted. And there's still a lot to do.
Right. The piece I think most people don't think about is after the bill's passed and it becomes law, there's implementation. And that's as important, if not more important, than the law itself, because that's not specified in law, right?
Yeah.
That is up to agency discretion. And so that is a huge part of what we do, is making sure the implementation of all the laws we talked about, even like the TATA reform, making sure that implementation is in line with the legislative intent. And
Have you ever trusted a government agency? Probably not.
You might trust me even less now. Okay, so keeping an eye on those agencies about how they implement this, as that it's as intended, not as interpreted.
Right.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh my.
Yeah.
I don't envy your role there. That doesn't sound fun.
Yeah. Well, someone's got to do it right now.
Exactly. You're the right person for the job.
Yeah.
Here.
No, we. Policy is so important, and I realize that's a very wonky thing to say, but our team sees that firsthand, and y'all feel that, right? And so, thank you for letting us be on the front lines of getting to do this and making sure that the implementation of our pro-life laws is actually is what you want, is what is intended by our legislators and by the citizens of Texas. So
there you go.
Well, thank you so much
for
what you do. I don't get to say that to your face enough, because you're not in here that often. But thank you for what you do in Austin and keeping up with what our government is doing when they're doing what they're supposed to, or maybe not.
Right.
We appreciate your team's efforts. So if you want to know how you can get involved, we're going to put the links in the description where you can send your emails to
the guy.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know.
We know a guy.
It's Greg Abbott's office. Okay, so yeah.
Cool. We'll get that form for you. And if you want to support what we're doing in Austin, keeping our state government accountable, links below. Friends, thanks for watching. We appreciate it so much. Like, share, have conversations with your friends. Tell them about what's going on in their own government, in their own backyard. That's how we're going to change hearts and minds, save lives. Thanks for watching. We will see you all next time.